But one of the big points was to try to introduce people to the sport. So I'd hold meetings where I'd explain what it's like to learn to skydive and what the process is all about. And then hopefully I'd take them out skydiving. The dark side of this was that I also got a kickback from the drop zone operator, so that helped pay for me going skydiving. So it was a little bit deceitful. Another part of all this is the pictures that you're going to see in this talk are largely ones from my own collection. They're ones I've either taken or ones that are taken of me. So it's not, these aren't like special people that I had to get these pictures from. These are like real stuff.
Barry, I got a question.
Yes.
So in that bottom right,
Mm-hmm.
picture, is that you or someone?
I'm standing, and a gal named Colleen Malone is head down, and she's got her hand reached out on my head.
I see.
And that's actually over Skydive Lake Tahoe.
Do you use a special camera, or is it just an ordinary camera?
It's over there, and I'll show you in a minute.
Okay.
I've been jumping for 11 years. My first jump was just a little over 11 years ago. That's actually incorrect. I made 5 jumps last night, so I now have 1,890 jumps. I've been instructing almost the entire time that I've been jumping, mostly because I like it, but also because it paid my way and allowed me to keep jumping before I had a job that paid better. Bit of honesty, I have broken my ankle once. It was a pretty bad break. I had 2 surgeries to fix it all up. It was my own fault. I was young and stupid at the time. And also during this 11 years and 1,900 jumps, I've had to use my reserve parachute 4 times. So why on earth would anyone throw themselves out of a perfectly good airplane? For some reason, this line has entered the vernacular, and everybody asks me this. And the best answer I can come up with is just simply more fun than we should be allowed to have. I figure it's the same reason if you downhill ski or you skateboard or you surf or something like that. It's a very engrossing, involving, separating from your normal daily existence kind of thing. And I just absolutely love it. So that's why I keep doing it. And it's also very challenging. It's not like the same thing over and over again. I'm still continually learning about how to fly better and how to teach better. So let me give you just a brief history about what the heck's been going on with parachuting over the years. I think the first known drawing of parachutes was by Leonardo da Vinci back around 1500. And he had this notion of a 4-sided thing with fabric on it that a person would hang from the middle of. Very interestingly, in the last year, someone's actually built one, and it does in fact work. The first parachute jump that was successful, for some definition of successful anyone knew about, was on October 10th, 1997 in France. I don't have a picture of that, unfortunately, but I do have a picture of a gal named Tiny Broadwick, who was a barnstormer in the early 19th century around the US, and she popularized parachuting to thousands and thousands of people. So that's sort of where we were then. She's sitting in a saddle, and the parachute's like in this bag held up here, so when it opened, she kind of just had to stay balanced on the saddle because she wasn't like in a harness or anything, so it was kind of spooky. Then the next adoption of parachuting really came from the military. So you had folks, one person after another, bailing out of airplanes in flight, presumably to go kill people down here and not be shot on the way down and so forth. So that wasn't much fun yet. Sport parachuting evolved directly from military parachuting. They used almost the identical gear with all the good parts and bad parts. The good parts being it was cheap. The bad parts being it didn't land real well. Soldiers, they're in great shape. They can hit the ground pretty hard. That's okay. But then people started modifying military canopies and coming up with their own designs. So skydiving went through the scary phase where people tried to figure out what parachute should look like. This is a good example of a parachute that no one jumps anymore because it's really scary, but it's still better than the round parachutes in a lot of ways. And then came the early square parachutes. So you went away from this notion of a parachute being a round thing. And sport parachutists largely transitioned to using square parachutes, which can actually fly forward and turn more accurately. And now we have like really fancy square parachutes that fly forward very fast and land very softly. And so that's where we are now. And this parachute's still rectangular, and they've even gone farther and made parachutes that are actually elliptical in shape, so there's less drag on the wings, and they fly faster and turn faster and get more lift. So there's a lot of technology that's gone to making parachuting a reasonable, safe pursuit instead of Tiny Broadwick sitting on a swing. So learning to skydive, there are sort of 3 ways you can make your first skydive. Yes?
Back up slide.
Sure.
0P.
Oh, right, I didn't mention that. 0P is the type of fabric. It stands for zero porosity, which means that no air goes through the fabric. So you can imagine if you built a wing out of fabric that air could go through, as it's flying, it's also going to be sort of sinking through the air as air flows through. If you make that thing so no air can go through, you get a better separation of high pressure and low pressure, so you get a lot more lift. Just a much better parachute that way. It actually reduced the average size of parachutes by probably a factor of 2. So it was a pretty big improvement, and also really improved their landing characteristics and their flight speed envelopes. So you can fly them very slow or very fast. So as I said, there were 3 ways you can make your first skydive. So you're thinking, well, how do I go jump out of a plane? Do I just go somewhere and some guy puts a parachute on me and poof, off you go? No. Fortunately, that's not the way it works. There are 3 main ways. I'm going to go through all 3 of those. And as for these pictures, Tahoe, Arizona, that's Mount Rainier in the background, and this is also in Washington. So tandem. It only takes about 20 minutes to learn to make a tandem skydive. You exit from 13,500 feet and you're actually attached physically to an instructor. So you're at like this double harness system that holds you together. So if I were a tandem instructor, I'd be standing here and my student or passenger would be standing right in front of me facing the same direction and would be attached here and here. You both land under one large parachute after a free fall from sort of like full altitude. And the problem with it is there's no like learning progression that follows after this. It's kind of like going for a carnival ride. That's starting to change now as instructional methods are improving. You start giving the passenger some responsibilities like being able to turn or opening the parachute and stuff like that. But nevertheless, it's kind of a dodgy way right now, so it remains to be seen if this is going to be a good way to learn to skydive for real. But this is a good way to get an exposure to skydiving. It only costs about 150 bucks. It only takes an afternoon of your time, so obviously it's very popular. And this is what it looks like. So you got the instructor and the passenger presumably having a great time. This up here goes to a very small parachute that's dragging behind them to slow them down. Because if you have twice as much mass with the same frontal surface area, it falls really fast. So to get the fall rate under control, they tow what's called a drogue behind them. Another option for learning to skydive is static line. This derives directly from the way the military teaches people to jump. You leave the aircraft from a relatively low altitude. There's a line attached to your parachute and to the aircraft. The line extracts your parachute and then detaches, hopefully from the parachute and not the aircraft. And you land on your own under that canopy with some radio assistance. You don't really get any free fall, but it's possible to do that several times and then start jumping without a static line and immediately pulling your parachute and then falling for 5 seconds, falling for 10 seconds, and so on. So that's kind of how that learning progression went. Someone in the audience, Dan, has actually gone through that progression over the last month or 2.
So this also gets to your second parachute if the first one doesn't open, or this guarantees the first one, what if the first one fails?
If the first parachute fails, all sport parachutists are required to have 2 canopies. So if one doesn't work, it's possible to get rid of the first and go to the second. And I'll show you a little bit about that in just a second.
Possible or
Easy.
Almost
always possible.
But I was thinking there's a line coming, right? It tries to extract and probably attach to the first one, or is it also attached
It's
to
just
the second one?
attached only to the first one. It's your you're away from the aircraft. The aircraft's flying 80 miles an hour forward. It's totally out of the picture. It's your responsibility to deal with the problem. Yeah. I'll even show you how that's done. Yeah. You do have, skydiving is definitely a your responsibility kind of thing. This is a picture of a static line student with a really bad body position. This is the static line going back to the aircraft. This was probably taken from the door of the plane. This is actually the wheel of the plane right there. And you can see it pulling out the beginnings of the parachute as he falls not very far away. That's not me, and I didn't take that picture. When you're trying to fall, imagine you're in free fall and the wind is coming at you in some direction. What you want to present to that wind is a very smooth surface that the air spills off of you cleanly. So if the wind was coming straight at me, a good body position would look like this, so that the air spills off front and back and sides evenly. Our friend here has his knees dropped, his arms somewhat forward, and his head down, which doesn't look at all like that. So he's even, so he's not going to roll or anything, which is good for this, but he doesn't have that really solid body position that you'd like to see. The third way to learn to skydive is called accelerated free fall. It involves a little bit more training, but you go up with 2 instructors who are actually holding on to you. You get a full free fall of like 50 seconds or so, and then you deploy your own canopy the way an experienced jumper would, and then you land solo with some radio assistance again. This progression then goes with you jumping with 2 jump masters and doing some turns, then them letting go of you. You practice doing back loops and turns and tracking and stuff. So it's a shorter progression, but it involves a lot more direct personal attention. Therefore, it's more expensive, and the first jump costs about $300. And that's what it looks like. So you've got two instructors hanging on to a student who right now is practicing reaching back for his ripcord. And that actually, yes, is the aircraft behind them, which is just kind of a cool bit about this picture. The pilot dove the aircraft afterwards, and so got in the picture. Licensing. It takes about 20 free fall jumps to get an A license. And in this country, that's managed by the United States Parachute Association. It doesn't cost very much. There's a test you have to take and all that sort of stuff. So that's a balloon. That's Richard Bailey, who also works for Microsoft, and he's towing a tube behind him because it looks cool. And that's Ken Hyatt, who also works for Microsoft. So what's it cost? What's this whole crazy sport cost? It costs about $1,500 to learn how to skydive, no matter how you go about it. It might be $1,100, it might be $1,700, but it's in that kind of ballpark. Depends where you go, and so forth. Buying gear, like a harness and container and parachutes, costs somewhere between $1,500 used, maybe scary, and $4,500 brand new, gorgeous custom. You kind of get to pick where you fall in that range based on how much money you have and how you feel about your landings and so forth. But once you know how to skydive, a jump's only $16. It's just not that expensive a thing to get in a plane and have someone haul you up to 13,000 feet. If you want someone to pack for you, that costs about $5. But most people pack for themselves. It's a process that only takes, if you're good, 10 minutes. It's not very onerous, and it's sometimes better than paying $5. But if it's a hot weather day or you want to make a lot of jumps, it's kind of nice to have someone take care of that for you. Reserve repacks. The reserve in the parachute has to be repacked every 120 days by an FAA-certified rigger, and for good reason. You want to make sure that it's in good shape, nothing's happened to it, and it's packed correctly. That only costs about $30. So.
How's it been given the weather is cloudy out there in Seattle? Do you get to kind of skydive only in the summer, or is it uneven?
You can jump during the winter, but you can't jump through clouds because clouds sometimes have a silver lining, which is called another airplane. So the FAA doesn't really like you jumping through clouds much at all. So the jump season here is from sort of late June to mid-October. You can jump outside of that, but then you don't get all this cool, fun free fall stuff. But it's still kind of fun. The landings are becoming more interesting, and I'll talk a little bit about why you actually keep at this in just a second. Let me show you some equipment just real quickly. I'm a little short on time. This is 2 parachutes and a harness and container. The reserve is located up here, and the main is located right down here. Okay. I'll pull this out to the middle just a little more. It's worn kind of like a backpack. Of course, if I were actually wearing it, I'd put these straps around my legs, because otherwise this wouldn't work so good. I would actually deploy the main parachute by just reaching back to this handle right here and throwing the parachute, throwing a small parachute out, which will then drag out the big parachute. Were there to be a problem with that, this red handle here gets rid of the main canopy, or rather causes this device to be activated, which allows the canopy to separate. I don't have time to go into this, but I can show some of you afterwards if you'd like to see how this works. This handle over here, when pulled, starts the deployment of the reserve parachute, which is spring-loaded, and a big spring-loaded pilot chute pops out of the back, catches air, and yanks out the reserve. So that's how all this stuff works. I've made about 1,000 jumps on this rig, and about 500 on the parachute that's in it, and 1 jump on this reserve. Mm-hmm. You can find it. In fact, usually etiquette is on a load. If you see someone who's cut away their canopy, if you're in a position to follow it, you do. Some people are good and actually catch it in midair and then just bring it down with them. That's pretty studly. I just missed one 2 weeks ago. As for clothing, this is actually what I like to jump in these days. I like having very little fabric on my arms so the winds don't push me around. And the bagginess on the legs is good for particular body positions, which I'll show in another picture. This is a sort of bigger version of this. Just a big heavy jumpsuit, kind of colorful. For doing the stuff that's on the right-hand side of the image, which is building formations with other people while falling kind of face to earth, a jumpsuit like this is a little more appropriate. It's skin tight. It allows the wind to flow off you very, very easily. The faster you're falling, the faster you can turn because there's more wind going off of you. And it has these grippers here. So when you're building these things, there's something for people to grab onto. And yeah, this suit is that suit. Other bits of a... Yeah. There was a time when we didn't know how to teach how to fall stable very well. We didn't know how to explain that. So if you put more material out there, it gives you all this drag, and you can just kind of hang on that, and that keeps you falling straight down. That's gone away, certainly at a competitive level, with this kind of skydiving, because it's better to fall faster and rely on moving your body to cause you to turn, and you can be more efficient that way. Competitions in this style are done for speed. How fast can you build a number of formations? Something else we usually carry is an altimeter. It tells you how high above the ground you are. Very handy thing to have. Goggles, there's a lot of wind. And a helmet is not a bad idea. And you asked a question about the camera. This is the kind of camera that I carry. It's just a Sony PC7 mounted on the side of a helmet. And another little bit of equipment is this device here called a ditter, which tells you when the ground is coming. It beeps in your ear and says, hey, stupid, maybe you should do something now. It also records your free fall speed and does all sorts of cool stuff. Social skydiving computer. One other part of the rig I didn't mention is an AAD, which is an automatic activation device. It will deploy your reserve canopy if you're going through a certain altitude that would be low at a certain speed very fast, so that you will have something over your head and not hit the ground. They don't always work, but they're pretty darn reliable compared to where they were. So serious stuff. Seems like injuries in this sport are about equivalent to skiing. If you know 20 people or 30 people that ski regularly, probably one of them breaks their leg every few years or needs knee surgery or needs something done to them. Mountain biking, probably comparable. In terms of fatalities, the sport is less dangerous than hang gliding, mostly because you're not spending a lot of time near big cliffs and rocks. You're spending things far away. But it's probably more dangerous than scuba diving in terms of the accident rates. Effectively, there are about 30 fatal accidents per year in the U.S. And to give you some sort of metric of what that means, this is a plot of the number of accidents per year over about a 25-year period. It kind of looks like it's sort of level with one little peak over here. This is when we went from rounds to squares, and we were building those scary sort of intermediate canopies that no one knew what to do with. Right here was the invention of the separation device that makes it very easy to get away from your main canopy. And this blue line indicates sort of the fatality rate. This is a number of fatalities divided by the number of actives, sort of the number, an estimate of the number of active skydivers in the U.S. So in some ways, we're like 4 times safer than this was 20 years ago, which gives us a fatality rate of about 1 out of every 1,000 active skydivers dies in a given year, give or take. If you look at the average, rate of just dying normally, it's like 1 in 10,000, independent of all other statistics, you will die in the next year. That's just the way it is. So it's not ridiculously worse than you might be thinking.
I'm just curious, why is it that nobody did any skydiving in 1974?
I just don't have the data for that year. That should probably say no data, not 0. So why do you keep with this sport? I'm running a little over, but there have been a lot of questions, so I'm going to keep going, Yang. In terms of where do you go once you've learned to skydive, this sort of is a list historically of what competitions and what things people did. At first, no one knew how to free fall, so all you could do was see how well you could land. Can you land on a little target? Used to be the target was 10 meters across. If you hit that, you were a god. The target is now 3 centimeters across. So we've gotten a lot better at that. Style is being able to exit the plane and do a bunch of solo maneuvers quickly. And that was, again, before we knew how to relative work, which is fly with other people. And flying with other people involves doing formations rapidly with a group of, say, 4, 8, or 16 of your closest friends. Canopy relative work, which we see a picture of right here, is taking your parachutes and stacking them up together and doing formations and stuff that way. That's spooky. I don't do that. Freestyle is like aerial gymnastics. You go out solo, a cameraman films you, you do a bunch of stuff that's interpreted on difficulty and artistic. Sky surfing. Free flying. This is what I like to do, and this is why I'm wearing these silly pants. Free flying is something that's all about being able to fall in any body position and do pretty much anything you want with your body in the air if you want to. Do a 360 around any axis, you should be able to do so. You can fall at wildly different fall rates from like 140 to 220 miles an hour. It's just a really exciting thing to be doing. It's sort of where the really interesting stuff is going on in the sport right now. All the material on your legs makes it easier to hang from your legs and assume a body position kind of like this, falling that way. So all the drag is out here, and that's all my control surfaces. So you can think about how little surface is actually presented to the wind. You're really only flying with this material out here. And again, more wind speed means you can turn and slide and drive faster. So the whole experience is, you have a lot more control in 3D that way. So where's skydiving going? Yeah. I think it's kind of hokey. It doesn't offer anything that freestyle or free flying does, and it's a little bit more risky. Some people really enjoy it, and that's okay, but it's gotten a lot more popularity in the mainstream press than I think it deserves. I used to never get this question, but now almost every time I tell someone I skydive, the third question out of their mouth is, have you ever strapped one of them board things to your feet? I don't quite know where that comes from. So maybe that's my bias, but I don't think it's a particularly rich area of the sport. So there's some really out there stuff. Skydiving hasn't changed, is still changing. And I only have one slide left. I see as Jan walks in. Smaller canopies. The parachutes people used to use 10 years ago were 200 to 300 square feet. Someone about a month ago has landed a parachute that's only 46 square feet. If you think about 46 square feet, that's like 4 feet by 10 feet. That's tiny. That's a little teeny parachute. And what people do when they land those parachutes is they do a low turn, build up a lot of speed, then skim across the ground for a long, long way till they bleed off all that energy and then come to a stop. So a popular thing at drop zones now are swoop ponds, which is the ditch about 100 feet long that you skim along, try to drag a foot in, big rooster tail comes up. It looks really cool. If you blow it, you hit the ground still in that diving turn, you break your legs. So, you know, there's a trade-off here. Some other stuff, wingsuit flight. So free flying was a move to go to faster fall rates. Wingsuit's a move to go to slower fall rates. Basically, you get this big bat suit on, and you can fall very, very slow and cover really long distances. You can get about a 2-minute free fall from 13,000 feet and cover 2 or 3 miles. Yeah?
How much distance can you cover in that?
About 3 miles. I mean, it's a long way. It's really cool. I've only made 3 jumps in them. They're really neat. With a suit like this, you're getting, with a normal suit, a really good person can sort of get close to 1-to-1. This can get you up to 2-to-1. You probably can't quite reach 1-to-1, but you're getting in that direction. Some other stuff, this is really kind of out there. Blade running, you set up a slalom course on a ski slope, and the idea is to fly your parachute down the slalom course, staying lower than the top of the blades. It's really nifty. It's not clear where that's going to go. It involves a lot of infrastructure, but it's really cool. I haven't gotten a chance to do that yet, but I'd love to. And there's also base jumping, which is sort of an adjunct to skydiving. It's a lot different. It involves jumping off of fixed objects. This is in Norway. I went there a few months ago. It was really cool. So that's really about all I have to say. I think I've given you an introduction of what it means to learn to skydive, why you'd stick with the sport, how safe it is, and sort of what are all the different things you can do once you've been there. So there you go. And if you want to learn more, here are a whole bunch of useful links about a story about the first jump. This is a really neat website which talks about, it's one person's perspective. He's been jumping for about 40 years, and it talks about all the equipment and the places he's been. It's really nifty. USPA, a frequently asked questions file, the local drop zone, because I know you're all going to rush out and make a skydive in the next couple of weeks before the weather gets bad. There's also an honesty page, list of all the accident reports. It gives you about 5 years of all the fatalities in the sport. And if you're curious about what equipment costs or what it looks like, there's one example of equipment site. And I'd be happy to answer any more of your questions.
Do you recommend any jump schools locally?
I recommend Skydive Kapowsen. There are only a couple of local schools, and that's definitely the one I would recommend. Yes?
So those 2 minutes really go quickly?
No, actually. Something that, this is my own view on things, is you actually learn to, I don't know, either think quicker or slow time down in terms of your perception. I conceptually can go through a skydive and do something which to me lasted quite a while. Like I'll come up, do a pose in front of somebody, break and go do something else. And then I'll go watch the video and it looks like, and my time sense is just all wrong. So your conceptual length is much longer than the actual length. But I think that comes with practice, because on your first jump, it's like, holy God.
How much of the enjoyment comes from just floating down once you float your
20 or 30% for me. I think it really is a personal question. A lot of people enjoy it to different levels. Like on the last jump of the day, I make a point of opening a little higher just so I can enjoy the sunset and the view. And that's very calming.
What percentage time-wise of the jump in general is?
It's been shortening as time goes on because people are jumping smaller and faster canopies because it makes the landings more interesting. But in general, your free fall is about a minute and your canopy ride's about 2 minutes. Roughly speaking.
And how quickly do people cycle? Kind of 1 hour per jump or something? So you said
if you're jumping as fast as you can and you're packing your own parachute, it takes about 20 minutes to get to altitude. Your jump takes 10 minutes for you to jump, gather everything up, get back in the hangar. 10, 15 minutes to pack, 15 minutes to wait for the next plane. So like an hour. is probably right. But you could go at any rate you want. You just sign your name up and you get on the next plane. It's not like you sign up a week in advance for particular time slots or something. Yeah?
What's the highest altitude?
Personally, the highest is about 22,000 feet. When you get above about that altitude, you have to have oxygen with you on the way down, and that makes the equipment really expensive and hard to come by, because you're actually having to carry a bailout bottle and all that sort of stuff. So people don't do that very often. Pretty much the max anyone goes to is about 14,000 feet on a regular basis, and that's all above ground level, not above sea level, which makes it tough for drop zones in Colorado. Yeah?
You said that you used your reserve chute
Mm-hmm.
four times. What happened on those times?
All were different. The first two, I had an old pilot chute, and it had some strange opening characteristics, and it took me 2 malfunctions and 3 jumps to realize what exactly was the problem. I replaced that, and that problem went away. The third malfunction was me packing too fast, trying to get on a load, trying to do a shorter turnaround. And I was packing outdoors in the wind, and it just didn't put it together right. Oops. It was really, the sick part about that was I could have repacked it because I didn't make the load, and I had the malfunction the next morning. And the last malfunction was a new parachute. I was having someone pack who don't normally have pack for me, and as far as I can tell, he did something wrong, and it opened up spinning, and I just had to get rid of it.
If you're in a situation where you do go to your secondary pack, is that the end of the day? In other words, does it have to be packed by a...
Yeah, it takes, if you've got a friend who's a rigger, they can take care of you pretty quickly. But in general, you're looking at probably being out for the rest of the day. And if it's a busy drop zone on a weekend, the people who are riggers probably want to jump that weekend, so they may not want to pack for you. But skydivers tend to be a pretty close-knit community, so if there's someone who has an extra rig that's appropriate for you, they'll let you use it. No one wants to see anyone stuck on the ground.
Good. So let's thank Barry for his wonderful
All right. So if any more questions or want to look at this stuff, that's fine too.